Casas. Hello, Elena.
Hello again, Lorna.
Right, so what's making the top headlines this Tuesday?
Well, the spotlight's still on Syria, really. Look at this front page from the Lebanese paper L'Orient Le Jour. The big headline is the US pulls out all the stops to oppose the Russian veto. But what's really interesting is the editorial on that front page. They're talking about the concerns that Russia might have at heart in vetoing that and what Lavrov might be doing when he visits Assad to talk to him later. Now, they say we often talk about how moral concerns aren't perhaps anyone's first thought in international politics, but once you're the only people still backing a bloodthirsty government that's carrying out a massacre of its own people, that's not really real politic anymore. It's complicity in a murder, says that editorial. And they say there's a lot of speculation about the possibility that Lavrov might be trying to use Russia's leverage with Assad to kind of persuade him to back down privately, to kind of sort of reach a gentleman's agreement on the subject, and then because he has become such an undesirable ally to have, if you like. But that editorial reckons that for Russia, they're more worried about the concern that their own rebellious Muslim minorities in places like Chechnya might become a bit too inspired by the success of Arab Spring uprisings. And also perhaps they talk about Vladimir Putin's nostalgia for the Cold War, saying he would like to create an alternative bloc that Russia could lead, including perhaps Syria and Iran, that would then be able to oppose the West and restore Russia to some of the international standing that it once had. Now, it's not Bashar al-Assad, but his wife, Asma, who's also making news today. She's on the front page here of The Times. Assad's wife breaks silence is the headline. She's written them a long email in response to an op-ed piece they wrote about her, asking how she could possibly be still supporting him despite all of the carnage. And
famously, of course, she is British, isn't she?
She is absolutely, and as to quote The Times, intelligent, educated, and with a long history of good works. Now, the last time she spoke in the international press, you might remember she gave an interview to Vogue in which they absolutely raved about her and sparked huge controversy because that was after the uprising had already begun. So The Times is a little bit rather complimentary. They do sort of veer into that territory. So I'm sure there'll be people complaining about this article online later today. But what she actually says isn't all that controversial or surprising. She just says she continues to support her husband.
OK, well, let's move on to, we're going to stay in the Middle East, but look at the agreement between Fatah and Hamas. What are the papers saying about that?
Well, look at this cartoon from the Abu Dhabi-based paper, The National. It kind of sums up how uneasy this agreement is, because you've got Khaled Mashal and Mahmoud Abbas making peace signs to one another across the table, while there are guns shaking hands underneath. So there's an uneasy balance. But their editorial in that paper is pretty positive. They say this is the biggest step forward for the Palestinians in a long time, and without this unity, absolutely nothing can move forward. So they say at this moment, Palestinians should feel free to ignore what they call the Israeli government acting in bad faith, complaining about this, because this unity is more important than anything. Of course, though, it's not necessarily universally been well received by Palestinians. If we look at the Egyptian newspaper Aram, their correspondent in Gaza says that there's been no celebration at all, and a lot of the people there who voted for Hamas feel that they've been let down by their government brokering an agreement with a Fatah government they don't necessarily support.
Well, let's look at the Israeli press. How have they reacted to this?
Well, over in the Jerusalem Post, of course, a conservative paper, they're asking if an agreement brokered by Qatar can do any better than the ones brokered in the past by Egypt and so on. And they say they don't have high hopes. They think it's going to collapse fairly soon. They point out that Hamas in particular has become quite divided between the exiled leadership run by Khaled Mashal, which is starting to move closer to moderate Arab countries like Qatar and Jordan, and then the more radical leadership that's in power in Gaza. So they're not very confident. You might not expect them to be from a conservative Israeli point of view. But the New York Times also is flagging up all sorts of problems, saying that for Abbas this could cause all kinds of problems. The US aid on which he very much relies could be cancelled as a result of this, and of course it could play out electorally well for Hamas in the upcoming elections there, because it will mean Israel is less inclined to talk to Abbas, and therefore Hamas can say your approach isn't working.
And briefly, finally, a completely different subject, the Guardian paper in the UK, taking a look at something that comes up quite a lot in the French press, that is France's relationship with its former colonies in Africa.
Yes, their correspondent here in Paris has been to visit a very expensive house in one of Paris's most posh neighbourhoods, where apparently there's gold and jewel-encrusted taps, its very own hair salon, and absolutely, and then a whole fleet of sports cars. Now, this very luxury home belongs to the son of the president of Equatorial Guinea, but it looks like the parties there might be over quite soon, because he, along with the sitting presidents of Gabon and Congo-Brazzaville, is being investigated by the French authorities for embezzling public money, so the African public money, of course. So France hasn't exactly covered itself with glory in its relationships with its previous colonies in the past, the paper says, so maybe now they're clawing back some credit.
OK, thanks very much indeed, Elena, for that look at today's international newspapers. Still to come here on Live from Paris, Owen Fairclough with the business news, and he may be hot property, but Mark Zuckerberg faces a major test of Facebook's viability and freedom in India. More on that coming up after the break.